In this video, we are going to study about the larynx. The larynx is essentially an organ of respiration and phonation. It protects the lower respiratory passage and acts as a watchdog to prevent the entry of any materials other than air. When you see the extent of the larynx, it extends from the upper border of the epiglottis to the lower border of the cricoid cartilage. Above, it communicates with the laryngopharynx through the laryngeal inlet and below with the trachea. It lies opposite to the C3 to C6 vertebrae in adult and C1 to C4 vertebrae in children. The growth of the larynx in adult female is slow and does not differ much from a child. Hence, the laryngeal tone of both females and children are high-pitched. In male, the characteristic pubertal growth of the angle of the thyroid cartilage, that is the Adam's apple, make the voice deep. When you see the measurements, vertical measurements, it is about 44 millimeter in male and 36 millimeter in female. When you see the transverse diameter, it is 43 millimeter in male and 41 millimeter in females. The anteroposterior diameter is 36 millimeters in male and 26 millimeter in females. Next we'll see the skeleton of the larynx. The larynx is composed of 9 cartilages which are connected to one another by ligaments, some synovial joints, intrinsic muscle, cricovocal and quadrate membranes, and they are lined internally by mucous membrane. Out of the 9 cartilages, 3 are unpaired and 3 paired cartilages. The unpaired cartilages are, you have the epiglottis. So this is the epiglottis, then you have the thyroid cartilage and then you have the cricoid cartilage. The 3 paired cartilages are the arytenoid cartilage, the carniculate cartilage and cuneiform cartilage. All the laryngeal cartilages are hyaline in structure except the epiglottis, the carniculate, the cuneiform, the ocal process and the apex of the arytenoid, which are made up of fibroelastic cartilage. The hyaline cartilage may ossify with the advancement of the age, but ossification does not affect the elastic cartilages. Now we'll see about the epiglottis. The epiglottis is leaf shaped and it extends obliquely behind the hyoid bone and the base of the tongue. The epiglottis presents 2 ends, an upper end and a lower end, and 2 surfaces, an anterior surface and posterior surface, and 2 borders. So you have this is the lateral borders. So these are the 2 lateral borders. So again I repeat, so it has 2 ends, an upper end, lower end, 2 surfaces, an anterior surface, posterior surface and 2 lateral borders. So this is the upper end of the epiglottis. It is also the upper margin which is free, covered by the mucous membrane and forms the upper boundary of the inlet of the larynx. The lower end, so this is the lower end. The lower end is connected to the posterior surface of the thyroid angle by the thyroepiglottic ligament. Thyroepiglottic ligament. So in this picture you can see the tongue and this is the epiglottis. The upper part of the anterior surface, what you are seeing is the anterior surface, the upper part. The upper part of the anterior surface of the epiglottis is covered by the mucous membrane and it is connected to the base of the tongue by a median and 2 lateral glossoepiglottic fold. On either side of the median glossoepiglottic fold, you have a mucus depression that is known as a vallicula. In this picture, you can see this is the anterior surface of the epiglottis. The upper part of the anterior surface is connected to the base of the tongue by three fold, a median glossoepiglottic fold and two lateral glossoepiglottic fold. The lower part of the anterior surface is connected with the hyoid bone by hyoepiglottic ligament. So this is the hyoepiglottic ligament. The posterior surface of the epiglottis. So this is the posterior surface. The posterior surface of the epiglottis is covered with the mucous membrane and forms the anterior wall of the laryngeal upper part of the laryngeal cavity. It is concave from side to side and present a tubercle in the lower part. The mucous membrane covering the anterior surface and upper part of the posterior surface is non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, whereas the lower part of the posterior surface is lined by ciliated columnar epithelium. So now we'll see about the lateral borders. So these are the lateral borders of the epiglottis. The lateral border is free in the upper part, but the lower part provides attachment to the aryepiglottic fold. So this is the aryepiglottic fold of the mucous membrane which intervenes between the laryngeal inlet. So this is the laryngeal inlet and this is the piriform fossa. So the aryepiglottic fold intervenes between the laryngeal inlet medially and the piriform fossa laterally. Through the aryepiglottic fold, the epiglottis receives the attachment of aryepiglotticus muscle and thyroepiglotticus muscle. So now we'll see about the thyroid cartilage. So this is the thyroid cartilage. The thyroid cartilage acts as a shield to protect the larynx from the front and lies opposite to C4 and C5 vertebrae. It consists of two lamina. So these are the lamina which meet in front at the thyroid angle. So this is the thyroid angle. The thyroid angle is more prominent in adult male that forms the Adam's apple and measures about 90 degree. In female, the angle measures about 120 degree. Each lamina is quadrilateral. So this is quadrilateral in shape. And you have an upper border, the lower border, an anterior border and posterior border. And two surfaces, you have an outer surface and inner surface. The upper border of the thyroid cartilage is convexo-concave from before backwards. And it gives attachment to the thyrohyoid membrane. So this is the thyrohyoid membrane. So it is attached to the upper border of the thyroid cartilage and extends up to the upper border of the body and the greater cornu of the hyoid bone, and it is separated by the subhyoid bursa. The lower border is straight in front and concave behind. And it is connected with the anterior arch of the cricoid cartilage by a conical fibrous band, the conus elasticus. The rest of the border provides insertion to the cricothyroid muscle. The anterior border. So these are anterior border. The anterior border of both laminae meet at the thyroid angle. So this is the posterior surface of the angle of the thyroid cartilage. So where the anterior border meet. So the posterior surface gives attachment from above downwards. You have an unpaired thyroepiglottic ligament and a pair of vestibular ligament and then a pair of ocal ligament. So 5 ligaments are attached. So thyroepiglottic ligament, then vestibular ligament, then you have ocal ligament from above downwards. 3 intrinsic muscles are attached on each side of the ocal ligament from mediolaterally. You have the ocalis muscle, then thyroarytenoideus muscle and thyroepiglotticus muscle. Ocalis, thyroarytenoideus and thyroepiglottic muscle. Now we'll see about the posterior border of the thyroid cartilage. So this is the posterior border which is free and extends above and below as the superior and inferior horn. It receives the conjoint insertion of stylopharyngeus, palatopharyngeus and salpingopharyngeus muscle. The superior horn is connected to the tip of the greater cornua of the hyoid bone by lateral thyrohyoid ligament, which is nothing but the posterior thickened border of the thyrohyoid membrane. The inferior horn articulates medially with the cricoid cartilage, forming the synovial cricothyroid joint, and the recurrent laryngeal nerve enters the larynx behind the joint. Now we'll see about the outer surface of the thyroid lamina. The outer surface presents an oblique ridge. So this is the oblique ridge which extends downward and forward. The outer surface of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage gives attachment to the muscles from above downwards. So from above downwards you have the thyrohyoid muscle, then you have the sternothyroid muscle, then you have the thyropharyngeus part of the inferior constrictor muscle. So the dotted line represents the inferior constrictor muscle. So it gives attachment to the thyropharyngeus part of the inferior constrictor muscle. The upper pole of the thyroid gland, the lateral lobe of the thyroid gland, extends up to the oblique line between the inferior constrictor and the sternothyroid muscle. So here you can see this is the posterior border, gives attachment to the conjoint tendon of the palatopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus and stylopharyngeus muscle. The inner surface of the thyroid lamina is covered with the mucous membrane in the upper part and forms the lateral wall of the piriform fossa. Next we'll see about the cricoid cartilage. So this is the cricoid cartilage. It is a foundation stone of the larynx and presents a signet-shaped complete ring with a narrow anterior arch and a broad posterior lamina. The cricothyroid joint is situated at the junction of the two parts. The cricoid cartilage is situated at the level of C6 vertebra. The anterior arch presents an upper border and lower border, an outer surface and inner surface. Here you can see this is the anterior arch. So the anterior arch has an upper border which slopes downwards and forward. The upper border has two lips, an inner lip and outer lip. The inner lip gives attachment to cricovocal membrane which passes upward beneath the thyroid lamina and forms a thickened upper margin that is known as vocal ligament. The vocal ligament extends from the thyroid angle to the tip of the vocal process of the arytenoid cartilage, and it is covered by the mucous membrane forming the vocal fold. The cricovocal membrane is continuous in front with the conus elasticus. So this is conus elasticus. So the cricovocal membrane is continuous in front with the conus elasticus and behind with the fibrous capsule of the cricoarytenoid joint. The outer lip gives attachment to lateral cricoarytenoid muscle which extends backward and upward and laterally beneath the thyroid lamina, and it is inserted to the anterior surface of the muscular process of the corresponding arytenoid cartilage. The lower border of the anterior arch is connected to the first cartilaginous ring of the trachea by the cricotracheal ligament. The outer surface of the cricoid arch gives attachment to the cricothyroid muscle. It consists of a straight part that is known as pars recta and an oblique part that is known as pars obliqua, and behind that it gives attachment to the cricopharyngeus part of the inferior constrictor muscle. The inner surface of the cricoid arch is lined by ciliated columnar epithelium of the laryngeal cavity. Now we'll see about the posterior lamina. So this is the lamina of the cricoid cartilage. It is broad and somewhat quadrilateral. It presents an upper border, lower border, an outer surface and inner surface. The upper border presents on each side a convex articular shoulder which articulates with the base of the arytenoid cartilage, forming the synovial cricoarytenoid joint. The lower border gives attachment to the trachealis muscle. The anterior surface is lined by ciliated columnar epithelium of the laryngeal cavity. The posterior surface is divided by a median ridge into two lateral depressed area. The ridge receives the attachment of the tendon of the esophagus, which is formed by the fusion of two fasciculae derived from the outer longitudinal muscles of the esophagus. Each lateral area gives attachment to the posterior cricoarytenoid muscle. So here you can see the posterior surface of the lamina of the cricoid cartilage giving attachment to the posterior cricoarytenoid muscle. The posterior surface is lined by stratified squamous epithelium of the laryngopharynx. Next we'll see about the arytenoid cartilages. So these are paired cartilages, somewhat pyramidal in shape. It has an apex, then you have base and three surfaces, an anterolateral surface, a medial surface and a posterior surface. And two processes, you have an ocal process and a muscular process. So when you see the apex of the arytenoid cartilage, it is directed upward and slightly medially, and it articulates with the carniculate cartilage. So this is carniculate cartilage. The apex gives attachment to the oblique arytenoid muscle. So this is the oblique arytenoid muscle. The apex of the arytenoid cartilage gives attachment to the oblique arytenoides muscle. When you see the base of the arytenoid cartilage, so this is concave and it is directed below and articulates with the upper border of the lamina of the cricoid cartilage, forming a synovial cricoarytenoid joint. Each joint permits both rotatory and the gliding movements of the arytenoid cartilage. The posterior surface of both arytenoid cartilage are connected one another by transverse arytenoides muscle. So this is the transverse arytenoid muscle which connects the posterior surface of both arytenoid cartilage. So this is the only unpaired intrinsic muscles of the larynx. A pair of oblique arytenoid muscle lie behind the transverse arytenoid muscle and cross each other like a letter X and extends from the muscular process of one arytenoid cartilage to the apex of the opposite arytenoid cartilage. When you take the medial surface of the arytenoid cartilage, it is flat and it is lined by the mucous membrane and faces the similar surface of the opposite side cartilage separated by the laryngeal cavity. Now we'll see about the anterolateral surface. The anterolateral surface involves the ocal process and the adjoining area. Opposite the ocal process, it gives attachment to the ocalis muscle. So this is the ocalis muscle, just lateral to the ocal ligament. So this is the ocal ligament. Just lateral to that you have the ocalis muscle. Further behind and above, this surface provides insertion to the thyroarytenoid muscle. So this is the thyroarytenoid muscle. The vestibular ligament is attached here slightly above the ocal ligament. The rest of the anterolateral surface cranial to the vestibular ligament gives attachment to the fibroelastic quadrate membrane. So here you can see the schematic picture. So this is arytenoid cartilage. So this is the medial surface and this is the anterolateral surface and the posterior surface. The posterior surface gives attachment to the transverse arytenoid muscle, whereas the anterolateral surface gives attachment to the ocal ligament. Then you have the occulus muscle. Then you have the insertion of the thyroarytenoid muscle. Now we'll see about the processes. So this is the muscular process which is directed laterally and backward, and it receives the insertion of lateral cricoarytenoid muscle from front and posterior cricoarytenoid muscle from behind. The ocal process is directed forward to the thyroid angle and gives attachment to the ocal ligament at the tip and the occulus muscle laterally. The ocal ligament and the occulus muscle are contained within the ocal fold of the mucous membrane. Next we'll see about the carniculate and the cuneiform cartilages. So these are paired nodules of elastic cartilages are contained within each aryepiglottic fold. The carniculate and the cuneiform cartilages are set at right angles to each other, and the carniculate cartilage articulates with the arytenoid cartilage. Both the nodules of the cartilages acts as a prop and keep the aryepiglottic fold upright so that the bolus of the food in the pyriform fossa is prevented from entering the laryngeal cavity through the elevated laryngeal inlet.